When photographing famous monuments like this pier behind me, it's easy to find yourself with a view that's got too much sky and too much ground in it. You can either get closer or be a bit more creative with your framing. So from here, I'm just too far away from the building, and even zooming in doesn't really get around the fact that there is an awful lot of foreground and sky in this shot. Either I want to get closer to it or I want to frame it in some way that concentrates on the main subject. So for me, this just isn't really working. So I've just moved a little bit to the side here in order to find something that can frame the pier and fill up that blank space. Here's a nice railing, bit of fencing, which has got a circular section that is really framing the pier in the background very, very nicely. And notice how it's really filled that blank space at the bottom and the top. But also notice that when I take the picture, the camera is focusing on the pier in the distance, and you'd think that's what you'd want. But I'm going to show you an alternative approach that might look a little bit nicer. So instead of focusing on the pier, we're going to focus on this actual piece of fencing. Now with this in focus and the pier becomes a little bit blurred, notice how nice those lights have become in the background. They've turned into little blobs of light, which can look really attractive. So I'm going to try a version like this. Again, tapping on this fencing just before I take the picture to make sure that the camera isn't tempted to refocus on the distant pier itself. Right, I think I've got a few interesting pictures here, so let's review them and see which looks best. For this view of the pier, I've zoomed in a bit to try and make it occupy more of the frame, but it's still tiny. Look how much space is wasted here in the foreground with the beach and above with the sky. There's just nothing interesting here, so this to me just doesn't work as a picture. For this view, I've moved to the side in order to frame the pier in the background by this foreground fence. It's got a really nice circular element that is framing this section of the pier very, very nicely in the middle. Notice in this one how I've focused on the pier in the background and the actual fence is blurred in the foreground. That might be what you're after, but I think I can do a nicer version of that. Here I've kept the pier in the same position and the same size, but this time I've focused on the rusty fence itself, and to me that's made it a more interesting picture. If you zoom in, you can see the detail on the rusty fence here, while the pier in the background has become blurrier, and that has turned its lights into attractive little blobs. And this overall makes it the most attractive of the pictures that I've shown you here. And this is the one that I'd be happy to post. It'll work really well as a square as well.